Good afternoon, and welcome to the UC San Diego Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. I'm Suzanne Orcutt. I am a member of the Curriculum Committee and the coordinator for this afternoon's lecture by Dr. Stan Katz, entitled The Emperor and the Spy, The Secret Alliance to Prevent World War II. Dr. Stan Katz is a local historian and author whose research focuses on U.S.-Japan alliances. Dr. Katz's historical novel, The Emperor and the Spy, unveils a new window to a half-century of U.S.-Japan relations. Members of the Japanese royal family ally with a U.S. intelligence agent, Colonel Sidney Mashbir, to attempt to prevent a conflict between the nations. Katz's companion book is The Art of Peace, an illustrated biography on Prince Tokugawa. Prince Tokugawa was Emperor Hirohito's mentor and served as a national bridge between the East and the West. This presentation explores these books that address how two former strong allies became adversaries and the dynamics of how they came together again in friendship. Please join us in welcoming Dr. Stan Katz.
It's my pleasure to be here with you today, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. This journey started 20 years ago, approximately, 1999, when, as the owner of a couple of antiquarian bookstores, I acquired the personal papers of an American intelligence agent. Now, does everybody hear me clearly? Okay. Could the volume be turned up a little bit, George? Or Jorge? Okay, thank you. What came into my hands at the time from another bookstore owner was a large box of the personal library of Colonel Mashbir. And he's the spy you see, he's the individual you see on the cover of the book to the left, and that's Emperor Hirohito to the right. Well, this box had photos, letters, personal documents, official documents, and a collection of books as well that were part of the library of Colonel Mashbir. How they happened to end up in San Diego is linked to his third wife, Alice, who passed away in Carlsbad, California. And then her materials, some of them ended up in the Del Mar Antique Fair. And then someone purchased them and thought they'd write a book and held them for 7 years, did a little research, but then gave up because it's a lot of effort to write a book. It's one thing to have an idea, but to do it. And then it came to me, and I thought it would be a 2 or 3 year project and something that would be fun and easy, and it actually took closer to 14 years to write this book. And 5 years of it was editing, so it gives you an idea that it's a journey. The typical historical novel takes 10 years. And that's if you really know the material. But if you're learning and contacting others and taking classes like you're doing and such, takes longer. But it's been a very enjoyable journey. And the essence of the book, initially I didn't know what I was looking at. These materials were very foreign to me, literally and figuratively. They depicted a lot of individuals that look official. Some were Japanese, some were Americans, meetings. There were papers that said secret stamped on them. There were personal letters. But I really didn't know what I was looking at. So I was told that Colonel Mashbir had written an autobiography in 1953. And that autobiography basically you can barely find it now. There's hardly any of them available. It's called I Was an American Spy. So I read that about 4 times, trying to see if that could help me understand his personal materials that I had. And they were helpful, but there were a lot of gaps. And he didn't talk about a lot of what was in those papers, too. So that was tricky, and took time gradually researching various mediums, magazines, newspapers of the time, other books, to find out what was really hidden in these documents and books of Colonel Mashbir. The essence of the story is that there was an amazing effort by Japanese leaders during the first 40 years, many Japanese leaders, to prevent conflict between the US and Japan. And that has largely been forgotten. In the rush to move forward to form new alliances after World War II ended, a lot of what happened in the prior 4 decades has been forgotten, shelved, and maybe even pushed aside because the Japanese didn't want to look at World War II and their alliances that they don't feel that proud of, and the US wanted a new ally to combat communism. And so everybody was ready to run forward. So often what I hear about the book is people enjoy it and they say, but war happened anyway. Coincidentally, I heard that right behind me this morning. Well, that's largely the reason why I wrote a follow-up, which you'll learn more about in a minute too. But that comment would be the same in, if one were to look analogously at the Civil War and the efforts of Abraham Lincoln to prevent the Civil War, and yet the war happened. People still study the years leading up to it to better understand where the world was at and how we ended up at war with a nation, Japan, which had been our ally in World War I, and that had tried so hard to be on friendly terms with us. So I felt there was a need to understand what led up to World War II in terms of Japan and US conflicts. In addition to that, through this book, which highlights some of the alliances Colonel Mashbir made with some top Japanese leaders, I came to learn about some very admirable Japanese diplomats and members of the Japanese royal family who devoted themselves heart and soul for decades trying to avoid conflict, trying to stay on good terms with the US. So this here is Colonel Mashbir. He saw that conflict was going to possibly happen between the Japan and the US very early on. There was a lot of saber rattling in the earliest part of the 1900s as to who was going to control the Pacific, Japan or the US. And so he's a unique individual, very bright person, and he has a colorful past, which I'll get into in a little bit, but basically, in 1920, he wanted to become adept in the Japanese language. And so he ended up moving there and being attached to the embassy there, attaché, and becoming a language student. And he becomes a master linguist in Japanese. He learns it so well, and there's various dialects. He learns that. Even attempts to put together a learning, a 10-part continuing education pamphlet series on the Japanese culture so as to help other people coming to Japan to better understand the country they're going to. So he becomes, someone who could be teaching history on Japanese history and linguistics and things of that nature. And he's passionate about it. And he starts off thinking war is going to probably be inevitable, and they're the enemy. But gradually, he befriends people there, and he becomes one with the culture, comes to actually love the culture and people there. And he ends up devoting his life, the next, say, 20 years of his life, that is, to basically trying to prevent this conflict through whatever means he can, allying with top Japanese leaders. And so, what we're going to start now is learning a little bit more about Colonel Mashbir and some of his allies. Okay. Now, the follow-up book was written because I got so many questions about The Emperor and the Spy, God bless you, The Emperor and the Spy, saying, so what's fictional? What's non-fictional? Tell me more. And, you know, you tell people this is a novel based on non-fictional material. I hope you enjoy it. And some of this is true and some isn't. And after you answer that 100 times, you say, I need to do a follow-up, something that's non-fictional in nature. And so this book, fortunately, didn't take 14 years. It took 2.5 years. And the reason being is I already had done a lot of the research linked to the novel that had illustrations and newspaper clippings and magazines and things of that nature to draw from. And so, can anybody guess what university is bestowing an honorary Doctor of Laws degree on the individual on the far left, Colonel, that is Prince Tokugawa? Anybody can guess the university? Some people recognize it because the president is handing that honorary Doctor of Laws degree. USC, 1934. And so, Kleinschmidt is the name of the president. And coincidentally, this is the cover, this photo, to give you an idea of how obscure some of this material is and how little known it is, okay? Was gotten from a magazine, a large-size one, from 1934, around that period, that was crumbling. There was a page from it that I managed to scan, enhance, and bring out. Now, the prior speaker is from USC, the head of international relations. She would not even know about the giving of this honorary degree, and she's Japanese, because you can't find any records of it. The following year, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was given the same award by the same school in 1935, but I believe due to the conflict with Japan, so many things were erased, forgotten, moved forward rapidly, so that a lot of the history just isn't there unless you really dig deep. So it was exciting to use it for the cover. And he's getting an honorary degree for his academic contributions and philanthropic contributions. He devoted his life to bringing the US and Japan and the West in general together. And he became one of Colonel Mashbir's best friends and allies. That's why you're seeing it. Okay, that's the connection, and you'll see more about that in a little bit. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to Colonel Mashbir a little bit, the excitement of the life of a spy. Okay. These next 4 pages, 4 or 5, are from an illustrated timeline that's freely accessible on the website, theemperorandthespy.com. And it's mainly biographical about Colonel Mashbir's early life, some of the things that might not be shown in the historical novel, The Emperor and the Spy. I wanted people to enjoy a little bit about his colorful past. And he was born in 1891, Colonel Mashbir, and he, at 4, as it says there, he moved to Arizona and was mainly raised in Tucson. At age 13, he became a bugle boy with the Arizona Guard, which is pretty amazing, you know, you're talking about 1904. And he became, as it says on the bottom there, you know, basically a true son of the Southwest. Had a number of colorful jobs, if you can read it. Is it clear enough for you to read the bottom paragraph? Bronco busting, stunt, horseback riding for some of the early cowboy and Indian movies. Worked in copper mines, surveying railroads. And he also, he was interviewed in some of the newspapers of the time saying he knew some of the last famous sheriffs and gunmen of the Wild West. You know, and he developed an interesting connection to Native American peoples of the region. He learned Apache, even put together a 200-word dictionary because he wanted to make it easier for people who worked in Indian reservations for the Apache to get along with them better. He was already developing, and this is about 1914, his linguistic skills in different languages. And someone in the audience, Neil, he asked me something about language, you know, was his parents Russian? His father was Russian, the first Russian-speaking attorney in New York City. And when he was only 13, not Colonel Mashbir, Sidney, I'll call him Sidney when he's young, helped his father translate legal documents from Russian to English. So from a very early age, he was really developing his language skills. So now, he grew up in Tucson, and if you want to get a little feel for what Tucson and the University of Arizona were like at the time, you're welcome to go to the illustrated timeline on The Emperor and the Spy, and when you click the little blue links, you get more information about those particular subjects. And so he went to U of A for high school and college. So he was there for like 6 years. And he got degrees in drafting and engineering, and he became an inventor. And so you can learn more of some of those details to learn a little bit more about him in a biographical way. And of interest, they're all interesting, but he ended up during 1914 to 16, working with General John J. Pershing, maintaining security along the U.S.-Mexico border. Because he was from Tucson, he understood the language, he was sent on special operations across the border into Mexico, and one of his most significant jobs, he personally escorted Pancho Villa to a meeting with General Pershing. And that was a time when we thought we could have an alliance with him, but it didn't hold up, and he ended up being seen more as a bandito and revolutionary than a statesman. And next thing you know, Mashbir and Pershing and 50,000 American troops found themselves chasing down into Mexico to basically try and capture Pancho Villa. But they really didn't want to catch him. We were going to soon be in World War I. So it was a show, you know, I believe, publicity stunt to show, you know, we're containing the desperados down in Mexico. But really, we were preparing our 50,000 troops there for an upcoming war in World War I, where they needed to be, you know, a chance to really work out some of the rough edges before they faced a real war. Now, Colonel Mashbir, after, you know, once we get into World War I, he headed the Army's Eastern Division of Counter-Espionage. Pershing felt he was more valuable keeping him domestic rather than going to Europe. And he personally discovered and eradicated enemy networks of enemy spies in our own country prior to and during World War I. So he had a pivotal impact which has never really been recognized either. You know, he's basically a spy, and spies don't get written about too much. This was the first novel about him, and The Emperor and the Spy, and his own, you know, autobiography had very limited success. I interviewed his son. No one read it. I think Mashbir's hands were tied when he wrote that book. because they didn't really want him to reveal too much. They wanted to move forward and with a new Japan-U.S. alliance and leave the past behind, which I said earlier. But that's part of it. So during World War I, he has that positive impact to prevent terrorist attacks in America. And the novel highlights a particular terrorist attack that occurred, and then he was recruited to make sure it didn't happen again. So it's an interesting story, and I hope you enjoy reading it if you get a chance. So the war ends, World War I ends, and now he becomes an educator, and he develops the first Bachelor's of Art degree in military science and tactics at a public university. And he also helped create and commanded the first federally authorized ROTC program at Syracuse University. Both Syracuse University and University of Rochester of Arizona, where he was active in ROTC, both of them nominated him for the national award for the ROTC Hall of Fame. They only choose one person a year. Colonel Mashbir didn't get it, but both schools individually chose him, and it was based on material I sent them. Otherwise, neither one had even heard about him. So they were convinced it was essential, but once they knew about him, and they said they were going to try again in the future. So maybe one day he'll be recognized for his pivotal involvement in the history of ROTC. Now, here is Japan, Mashbir's destiny. Take a minute, take a look, and see some of the material there. What's unique about, there's many unique things about these two books, in a sense, is that they bring up material that folks would say can't be. Colonel Mashbir made two statements. He said significant statements about Prince Tokugawa on the lower right. One was that he was so influential that if he had not died in 1940, Japan would not have sided with the Axis powers. Think about what that means. One man holding back a nation. He also stated that Prince Tokugawa was the true power behind the imperial throne. You know what that means? He was the mentor to Emperor Hirohito, from him being a young crown prince through his later years. So you hear a statement like that, and you look at a dozen biographies about Emperor Hirohito, which I did, and you don't find Prince Tokugawa even mentioned once. You say, how is that possible? Okay? Well, you'll be more and more convinced as we move on with the presentation. But basically, here is a story about a spy who generally can't tell you too much, and an amazing diplomat, Prince Tokugawa, who was very humble and didn't want to shine the light on himself. So it's a combination of those two things. Now, here's a picture of Colonel Mashbir to the lower right with Prince Tokugawa in 1937. This was part of his personal papers. Take a moment to read what's beneath it. I don't want to distract you while you do that. Colonel Mashbir in 1937 was making a final effort. He knew war was potentially coming close, and so did Prince Tokugawa. And in the lower center, seated in the lower center. And those are other advisors of Prince Tokugawa, US and Japanese. But he had Colonel Mashbir right at his side, and he had just thrown an honorary luncheon for the return of Colonel Mashbir to Tokyo, to Japan, at the Imperial Hotel. And He was honoring his friend's return visit, and he was hoping they could work together still to prevent conflict, because they had developed an alliance during the past approximately 20 years, which worked well for both of them, trying to keep goodwill between their nations. Okay. Here's Prince Tokugawa with his family. He is being honored on the 50th anniversary as the head of the shogunal lineage of the Tokugawas, a dynasty that ruled Japan for 265 years. So Prince Tokugawa was not just anybody, and he was not just a politician. He was very much the bridge between the power of the Tokugawa dynasty that ruled Japan for 2.5 centuries, and then they continued their influence with him as he became an international diplomat representing Japan, and he became the president of the upper house of Congress for 30 years. So here was a man who had such influence through the long lineage and heritage of a dynasty that he would have been the next heir to. And he's the head of their Congress. And here he's befriending Colonel Mashbir because he really respects the man who's learned his language and culture, and who basically says in his autobiography and in the novel that if he could prevent conflict between Japan and the US, he would feel his life had had a good purpose, meaning. So it was a very serious passion going on here, trying to prevent what they saw could be a major conflict, and turned into a major conflict, regrettably. But they were doing their best to avoid it. Here is the founder of the Tokugawa dynasty. From around 1600 it began, 1603, and his name is Tokugawa Iesato. And you'll find that in Japan, usually you put the family name first and then the individual in the latter part. But when Prince Tokugawa traveled, his great descendant, basically he reversed it. He westernized it and made it Prince Iesato Tokugawa. In many ways, the relationship between Colonel Mashbir and Prince Tokugawa have similarities to the popular novel by James Clavell, Shogun. In that novel, a British individual who had some knowledge of military and ideas of the West became friends with the first shogun, who I just showed you earlier, the founder, and together they developed a friendship and alliance in the novel, historical novel, Shogun. And here, Colonel Mashbir and Prince Tokugawa develop a similar friendship. They discuss each other's cultures, and they try to work together to understand how best to get along and be respectful of one another. So I thought that was kind of an interesting similarity between the two of them. Now, in 1922 to 23, was an interesting time in history. Fascism was on the rise. Hitler was having his first marches in Germany, and Mussolini was coming to power as early as that. And Japan at the time saw all this instability, and there were militants who wanted to expand. They saw all these European colonial powers and said, why can't we expand too? It's good for them, maybe it's good for us. But at the time, the democratic, loving individuals like Prince Tokugawa and his alliance didn't want to have a war with China. They wanted peace in the region. So Colonel Mashbir went on a secret mission to Vladivostok to defuse a situation where 40,000 Japanese troops had been gathering in Manchukuo, Manchuria area, ready to expand their military operation and potentially cause a regional war. So Colonel Mashbir understood the culture and understood the Japanese language, and he understood Russian, and so he was able to go there on a special mission, which is presented in the novel, and basically diffuse it so that 40,000 Japanese troops go back to Japan without a war erupting. And he was supported in that process by Prince Tokugawa. And he also mentions it in his autobiography, I Was an American Spy, which is now easily available because Mashbir's son gave me the rights to that book, and I republished it as an ebook, very inexpensive. $2.95, you can learn all about Colonel Mashbir firsthand, but whatever he was able to tell you. So you have a novelistic portrayal, and you have a autobiographical portrayal of it. Yeah. By the way, I'm used to interacting with questions along the way, but I understand the format here is to save it to the end. So understand that I usually find myself engaging more with the audience and not just giving more and more information. So please bear with me, each system has its advantages, but this one, there will be 50 minutes of question and answer, which I look forward to. So I hope you don't mind me just moving on, okay? Thank you so much. Good, good. Now, the individual in the upper right is Baron Eiichi Shibusawa, and he was Prince Tokugawa's very good ally, and he also became a friend of Colonel Mashbir. He became such a good friend, he's known as the father of the modern Japanese economy. And as a matter of fact, in 2024, he is going to be the face of the highest currency of the Japanese currency system, their 10,000 yen note, because they very much honor him. Well, Shibusawa, because he basically was a friend of Prince Tokugawa, but he also saw Colonel Mashbir help during the Great Kanto earthquake. Colonel Mashbir mobilized in 1923 a major effort to help the Japanese after that earthquake. So here, Prince Tokugawa and Baron Shibusawa, who are top leaders of Japan, are seeing this American captain, basically at that time, moving forward and really understanding the language, culture, and helping them in their time of need. And they also see Colonel Mashbir as someone who diffused a war that could have happened in China around that time in 1922. And the earthquake was 23. So they both become very close to him. It's kind of a unique situation, but Shibusawa literally tried to create a loan deal that Colonel Mashbir could have brokered for $100 million, which would be the equivalent of probably $2 billion today, to rebuild Tokyo, because they wanted to make Colonel Mashbir a wealthy man. Because they felt if he was wealthy and had money, maybe he could have more influence in keeping their nations getting along. And if you go to the timeline, you'll literally see the documents that back that up, signed by Shibusawa, introducing him to the bankers and such who would be lending the money and such. Regrettably, some of Colonel Mashbir's partners undermined the deal, tried to cheat Mashbir out of his fair share, and the whole deal fell through. So Colonel Mashbir did not become a wealthy man, but it was a fascinating concept that here's an American intelligence agent who's literally being helped by the people he's spying on, in theory. He's there as a spy, but they understand his true values of trying to maintain peace. Okay, now, I'm going to show a few things linked to Prince Tokugawa and his significance, and give insights to who he is, and understand, this might help you understand why I felt biography specifically about him was warranted. There have been none written about him in English, and the ones that are written about him in Japanese are not about him, they're more about his father, who was the last shogun of Japan, Yoshinobu. But basically, he stayed below the radar with much of what he did. And I had to really search here and there, wide and far and wide, to find out about him. But the more I found, the more I felt, wow, here was a man who really deserved to be recognized, along with Colonel Mashbir. Here he's, what he did, what Prince Tokugawa did in the 20s, he required all public schools and universities in Japan to have essay contests where the winners of the contests who described best the values of Abraham Lincoln would be given an award. And here's one of those awards from the 1920s. And they would be given a bronze medallion-like coin, and their name would be etched in the back. And this is a presentation here of some of those students. Prince Tokugawa understood that wars are often based on racism, feeling one country or one people or one religion is better than another, and he basically wanted to eliminate that in his own nation, to educate his people. So he had an inspiring message, and which is needed today, right? Okay, and you probably never heard of his name, and yet in 1930, is anybody, I won't ask questions. In my mind, I'll ask, is anybody here from a member of Rotary? Yeah. I'm a past member, I might be rejoining, but in 1930, there was the 25th anniversary celebration in Chicago. And guess who was the keynote speaker? The keynote speaker. That's Prince Tokugawa. And to Prince Tokugawa on Tokugawa's right side, his right side, is the founder of Rotary, Harris. And to his left side, Bill Harris, is the current year president. And they're about to introduce him to 15,000 Rotarians around the country, around the world, actually. It's an international organization. So, and by the way, Mashbir was also a member of Rotary, so they had that in common too. And here he's giving the presentation to his fellow Rotarians. He was the honorary representative of the Tokyo chapter of Rotary. They sent him there as their honorary representative. Okay. Now, Prince Tokugawa realized that media shapes how people see each other and how global events sometimes unfold. Here is a one-of-a-kind photo. It took me a while to find it. I don't think you can find another. Where he was touring a movie studio, and there he arranged to meet with William Randolph Hearst, the most powerful media mogul of his time and probably of today. They own the History Channel and many newspapers and magazines, so it's still, basically the largest media company in the world. So he's meeting with William Randolph Hearst, trying to improve relations between the U.S. and Japan. And he's trying to get Hearst to be a little kinder to the Japanese and Asians in general, and basically try to get the media to promote a more positive relationship between different peoples. And I don't know how successful they were. It's a tricky subject, but he was trying his best to achieve that result. And he's in that picture with his daughter and his son, and the Consul General of Los Angeles on the far right. By the time I'm done, I think you'll probably say, there's no way, how could he have done all those things and no one's written about him? Well, someone has, okay? His time maybe has come. But basically, he was the president of the Japanese Red Cross Society. In 1934, there was an International Red Cross conference in Tokyo. He headed it. And at that conference, they created safe zones in what were Japanese-controlled cities of China. Because during the 30s, there was conflict between Japan and China, but they were limited. They build up, then they go down, build up. Well, Prince Tokugawa really wanted no conflict there. But while he was trying to contain the conflict, he decided, how can I minimize casualties to innocent refugees and civilians and such? So in 1934, he headed the creation of what were called safe zones. One was in Shanghai, that's one that's most well known, and in other cities. And these safe zones continued through the 30s and through World War II. They ended up saving tens of thousands of Jewish refugee lives and 500,000 Chinese civilian lives. Now, if you ask, the book just came out, the biography, about 2 months ago, and I haven't even started really promoting it. But if you ask people about these things, they'll say, what? Prince Tokugawa did that? You'll find disbelief. Now, after you go home and get the ebook copy, because it's an ebook, and you see the 400 illustrations, photos, magazine articles that confirm this material, maybe you'll share the word out there that here's a man who deserves to be recognized. And this is a result of a 20-year project, so it's not a flippant thing. There's a lot of other things that a person could do in their life. I run a property management company and do different things. So I'm a busy guy, but I felt this story deserved half my time for 20 years. So I put a lot of other things on a back burner because I felt this was a story that needed to be told. Okay? Now, despite Colonel Mashbir and his Japanese allies' heroic efforts, once Prince Tokugawa passed away, war erupted between their nations. It's hard to hold back global, I think about that, SSED, right? Yeah. I was going to correct that. I didn't get a chance. Good. Very good. Good eye there. Sharp eye. Good. You're constantly editing. You're constantly polishing. They say most writing is rewriting. But the bottom line is that basically war happened. It's hard to hold back a global fascist movement that was spreading from Europe. And the militants in Japan felt more and more encouraged as Colonel Mashbir, as Prince Tokugawa got elderly and the people with him who were promoting peace were older, and they saw the opportunity, and so they arranged alliances with Japan that pushed forward a war agenda. Regrettably. So now Colonel Mashbir puts on, he goes from the hat of the peacemaker diplomat to someone who has to win this war. And he heads an agency of 4,600 members, who are mainly Japanese-American Nisei. They're firstborn American Japanese who speak the language and can be helpful in translating documents picked up from the battlefield, interrogating prisoners of war, actually going into the battlefield, and basically predicting strategy with Colonel Mashbir. And then Colonel Mashbir would meet with Douglas MacArthur, General Douglas MacArthur, every morning and share the information that had been gathered the day before. And he does this all through the war. This is one of the places that these are the Nisei, mainly Japanese-American, who are basically handling little pieces, often blood-stained papers, documents, pulled out, from corpses, literally, during the war, and trying to figure out, are there maps? Is there strategic information? Not the prettiest job, but somebody had to do it, and he did it. he headed it. And here's another view of ATIS. ATIS is the name of the organization. If you look it up, you'll find a half-page Wikipedia article, but that's it. Presentation was given to a veterans group 2 years ago, and I asked, had anybody heard of ATIS, the Allied Translator and Interpreter Section? And zero. No one had even heard of it. It was a top secret agency that was pivotal in probably shortening the war in the Pacific by 2 years. So here's Colonel Mashbir, who tries to prevent war, then taking such a pivotal role in winning the war. So he led a fascinating life. Here, Colonel Mashbir is the one facing you between the Japanese and his superior officer, Willoughby, who was the chief of staff for General MacArthur. And basically, he's arranging the peace ceremony that's going to be coming. And these are Japanese delegates, and he's the interface because he understands the language, culture better than anyone. So he's going to be the guy who brings these nations together again in peace. Here's a picture aboard the USS Missouri during the signing of the surrender document. And Colonel Mashbir orchestrated, oversaw all the details of that surrender signing so that it appropriately invited, agreement from the emperor and appropriately invited the right people to sign it. Half the people who were invited to sign it would rather die because they were militants. So it was a heroic thing for Japanese to fly there, sign the agreement, and end this war, finally, that had cost so many lives. So here are the Japanese officials signing it, and oh, by the way, the website of the Emperor and the Spy.com has actual images of some of the surrender documents that Colonel Mashbir used in the preparation for this closure to the war. Okay. And there's Colonel Mashbir in the middle. Everybody's talking, and things are done, the war is over, it's time to celebrate, right? Check out who's really focusing on what's going on and how it's being done, and how it's being done correctly to avoid mishaps. Colonel Mashbir in the middle there. So now, General MacArthur and his staff, Colonel Mashbir is in the far right second row, not far right, but in the second row close to the furthest on the right. And basically they're raising the flag over the American embassy again. And Colonel Mashbir was given the honor by Douglas MacArthur of being the first non-prisoner of war to again step foot on Japan once it had been defeated. General MacArthur really understood how important he was in achieving that goal of victory. And Colonel Mashbir, during the early days of the occupation, based on his friendship with the Japanese royal family and his high regard for General MacArthur, and basically he was the perfect person to be the liaison between, and translator and facilitator between General MacArthur and Emperor Hirohito during 11 top secret meetings that no one knows exactly what transpired, but it was Colonel Mashbir who interfaced, and that was what shaped the occupation of Japan and the future alliance of Japan and kept us going in a very positive way in rebuilding a relationship. As a side note, I can't help but think we needed someone like a Colonel Mashbir when, say, the Iraqi war ended and we won a war, but we didn't know how to win a peace, and we basically missed an opportunity to maybe create a coalition government there that could have avoided a civil war. Well, Colonel Mashbir understood what were the underpinnings that could undermine peace between the U.S. and Japan after that war, and he was involved in guiding that process to avoid another future conflict. So, and he was successful. U.S.-Japan relations have been amazingly positive for the last, 65 years. So longer, actually, 55, 75 years. 75 years. So let's hear it for Colonel Mashbir. Good. Now, to give you an idea, in General MacArthur's own words, how he felt about Colonel Mashbir, only about 3 years ago, I discovered this photo on the left, portrait photo, purchased it from an attorney who had an estate that had passed away. So it was lying around somewhere with no one knowing about it, and now I share it on the website, and it's available on Wikipedia, and basically, I'll read it for those who might not be able to see it. To Mashbir, with admiration and cordial regard from his old comrade in arms, Douglas MacArthur, Tokyo, 1945. Now, if you know anything about General MacArthur, he's a pretty crusty, tough guy, and to write that kind of intimate message, not sign it general, and to say my comrade in arms to someone who's below him in rank, gives you an idea of the significance he held, Colonel Mashbir. And actually 5 times he attempted to promote him to general. And there were congressional hearings to potentially support that, and some of those papers are on this illustrated timeline. And at the time, General MacArthur was somewhat in the doghouse in terms of there was a presidential election coming, and they wanted Eisenhower, and they weren't going to support anything that he might be pushing, and Colonel Mashbir had been significant on the staff, and they basically were not going to cooperate. So Colonel Mashbir had to suck it up, as they say in military terms, and basically not get that promotion to general, brigadier general, that he deserved. I don't know, maybe posthumously he'll get it someday, you never know, right? Okay, here's some celebrations. The war has finally ended, and so that's an exciting time, the war between Japan, and so there's a couple, Chicago there, a lot of people there, the world's busiest corner, they called it. And then here is the same celebration, VJ Day in Times Square. And here's Colonel Mashbir, the back of his autobiography in '53, he wrote it. And it was republished recently by yours truly, basically, because I felt his story deserved to be out there with his words as well, make it available. And so it's an ebook. It's on Amazon, very affordable, and it's a fun read too, but a little drier. It's not a historical novel, and he didn't spend 5 years editing. And I don't blame him. He felt he knew the subject. So, but it gives you some insights into his personality and what he achieved. And here he's being given a medal in the Pentagon. I left out one quick thing. I see the word Pentagon, and I think he is one of the 2 pioneers, founders, who created the first template for the implementation and creation of the CIA. If you go to their website, he's not mentioned at all. If you go to his autobiography, he will tell you. So people don't always get recognized during their lifetime. They say that about artists, and espionage might be considered an art form too. Okay, here are some of his medals. And there's a bunch more that I acquired over the years, God bless. And in 1988, Colonel Mashbir posthumously was awarded the certificate by the Army Military Intelligence Corps Hall of Fame. So if you go to Huchuka Military Base, I'm not sure of the pronunciation, I keep...
What's your
Huachuca. He's there, and he's recognized in their little museum, which most people don't get to. But I got the certificate from his son, Donald, who sent a bunch of other papers to me and wished me to bring out his father's story. Okay. Then national recognition finally came to the people who served under Colonel Mashbir. President Obama basically gave a gold medal presentation, Congressional Gold Medal, to the thousands of, there weren't that many survivors, but to all the members, but to the surviving Nisai who served under Colonel Mashbir. And there were 3,000 guests at this ceremony and 5 U.S. senators. And his goal, Colonel Mashbir's goal, he promised in his autobiography someday to give them the recognition they deserved. So, because they basically were Japanese heritage going against their own nation in war. So it was a dangerous thing to do, and but they did it for their new nation. And they're highlighted in the novel and things of that nature, somewhat dramatically, I hope. Let's see. And here's The Emperor and the Spy. Here is The Art of Peace. And if you want to be kept up on future events and future materials that are shared through blog posts or possibly Facebook, if you go to theemperorandthespy.com, you'll see there's a lot of material there already to enjoy. But if you want to have future updates, you're invited to do so. And I think we're done. So it's been a pleasure.